Hi everyone! We are going to talk about the topics of absolute and relative change. This topic is used to describe how one thing has changed. In the future, we'll talk about comparing two things, but for now, we'll just talk about one thing. For example, that one thing possibly being the stock market going up. You might describe something like Microsoft has gone up 400% in the last 3 years. Or you might talk about how house prices have gone up. You might say that someone's house has increased by $30,000, or you might say it's gone up by 5% over the last 3 years. You could talk about maybe the price of Beanie Babies, how they've gone down. People used to spend like thousands of dollars on them, thinking that they'd be worth a lot someday, and some are, but most of them aren't worth anything. Or maybe even how a population has increased, thinking about how India's population has increased by, I don't know, maybe 12% in a year. So these are important things to understand, and we're going to tackle that today. Here are the two formulas. I'd like you to get those down, please. All right, so now after pausing the video, we can go ahead and we can start this. All right. So here's an example. The world population in 1950 was 2.6 billion. By the beginning of 2000, it had reached 6 billion. Describe the absolute and relative change in world population. So absolute change is really just taking the new value or the new population and subtracting it from the old population. So for example, we are going from a new value, and that new value is 6 billion, that's in 2000, so that's 6 billion, minus, and then our old value is what was true in 1950, in this case 2.6 billion. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to subtract those. And of course, I get 3.4. And we got to include our units, or 3.4 billion. So we have to create a sentence that is true, given this absolute change. And we would say something like, the population has increased by 3.4 billion. And you could say in 50 years, you could say from 1950 to 2000, whichever one you prefer. So that's absolute change, basically subtracting the two values and then making a statement about it. The population has increased by 3.4 billion from 1950 to 2000. So that's absolute change. I'm going to write AC for absolute change. Okay, now for relative change, we do the new minus old value over the old value. And then we multiply this by 100% because we're essentially changing a decimal into a percent. Now, I like to call this the Noo formula. Essentially, you can see that this is an N, this is an O, and this is an O. So I guess you could just call it the NOO formula, where you're doing new minus old over old. And then, of course, multiply it by 100 because you want to convert this into a percent. So we're going to use the same information. Our new is going to be, sorry about that. Our new is going to be 6 billion. So that's going to be 6 minus our old, so minus the 2.6. And then notice how you're repeating the O. So it's that second thing that you repeat. And so what we'll have here is divide by 2.6. Now I like to get that answer first, and then I'm going to go ahead and multiply by 100. So 6 minus 2.6 we already know is 3.4 divided by 2.6. Okay, put that in my calculator, and I get a decimal of 1.3076. Now let's round properly, and we're going to round to the nearest hundredth. So that means 2 decimal places. I'm going to underline this, look at my 7. I know that I'm going to round that 0 up, so I'll have 1.31. And again, remember, part of our formula is to multiply by 100. So I'm going to multiply by 100, and I'm going to get 131%. So we could say that this is going to be relative change. We can say that the population has increased 131% from, you could say in 50 years, or just from 1950 to 2000. All right, and we talked about, I think the first day of class, talking about how 100% means it's doubling. So obviously 131% means more than that. So absolute change is just subtracting the two values, and relative change is doing the formula of the no. All right. I want to emphasize that the wording of our sentences differ when it happens to be absolute change versus relative change. If I'm asking you for an absolute change answer, you're going to say something like the price of gas has increased by $2, or the cost of this Beanie Baby has decreased by $200. Maybe you can say that this house is worth $20,000 more, or my computer that's 10 years old is worth $1,000 less. In other words, when you do absolute change, your answer is not a percent. Relative change, however, is going to be a percent. And almost always you're going to say something like percent increase or percent decrease after. If we go back and we look here, oh, I didn't know it did that. We have the percent has increased by, or increased 131%. So you have that increased or has decreased. And obviously if you get a negative number, you would say decrease. If you had a positive number, you would say increase. All right. So I bought my computer for $1,000 in 2013, and then in 2016 it was worth $300. Find the absolute and relative change. And I hope it goes without saying that I want you to write a sentence for both as well. All right, so where's my old? My old is going to be this, and then my new is going to be this. And just reminding ourselves, what is the formula for absolute change? It is going to be the new minus the old. So we are going to have our new value, which is $300. That's our new, minus the old, which is $1,000. And that gives me negative 700. So if we go back to the previous slide, we have a few options with how we can write a sentence for absolute change. We could say decreased by, we could say worth less, and the reason I'm choosing those two is because really we got a negative answer. So going back to that problem, how can we write a sentence? We could say that the computer is worth $700 less. Or maybe you want to say the cost of the computer decreased by $700. So this would be absolute change. You're just subtracting those two values. All right, so the next one here we're going to do is going to be relative change. And that's going to be the new minus old over old formula, or no. So our new value is 300 minus 1,000 over, again, we repeat that 1,000, that one that's second there, we repeat that. And so that's going to give me negative 700. over 1,000. And if you want, you could just move the decimal back 3 places because you're dividing by 1,000, or you can see that that answer on your calculator gives negative 0.7. Please don't forget, part of that formula is to multiply by 100, which means moving your decimal twice. So if I have negative 0.7, I'm going to move my decimal here and then here. Okay, and so I'm going to have equal to negative 70%, because this decimal now disappears, it's gone, and it becomes right here. So negative 70%, well, we don't really want to say negative anything. We basically just want to say decreased by. And let's go ahead and look at our options and see. Remember, if we have a negative answer, we're saying decreased or decreased by. Either is fine. So a sentence here, we can say computer value decreased by 70%. And notice how I'm keeping it positive now. The fact that I said decrease really indicates that it's negative. All right, so you've got absolute change as a review is just subtracting the two values, new minus old. And then for relative change, you do new minus old over old. You get your answer, you multiply it by 100, or you bring your decimal over twice. If your answer is positive, you'll say increase by. If your answer is negative, you'll say decrease by. Same thing with the absolute change. You've got a few options of how to deal with saying something that's negative versus how to say something with positive. Okay, I hope you guys enjoyed that video. Have a great day and good luck on the practice. We'll certainly touch base soon.